The morning she was to leave the vicarage came in slowly, the way kind mornings do in the Hampshire country, lifting the small parish out of the dark in long, quiet pieces. First, the milk pail lifting above the apple orchard, then the silvering of the dew along the kitchen garden path, then the first careful note of a thrush in the lilac. In the small, narrow bedroom under the eaves, a young woman of 23 stood at the foot of her childhood bed in her stocking feet, with her honey-blonde hair pinned in a soft, low chignon, and a single sprig of small white roses tucked at the side because her younger sister had crept in at first light and put it there. The trunk was open on the counterpane. There was the soft cream Regency muslin day dress laid carefully on top, and beneath it her 2 other gowns, and her stockings and chemises, and the small Bible her mother had given her at confirmation, and a packet of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. She was not weeping. She had decided the night before that she would not weep. She was a country vicar's middle daughter, and she had been raised on the understanding that life moves a person about, and that one goes where one is sent. There was a soft knock at the door. 3 short, kind taps. It was her father. "Come in, Papa," she said. The door opened. Her father came in carrying something small in both his hands. He was a thin, gentle man of 59, in his good black cassock, and his soft hazel eyes were already a little red about the edges. "My dear," he said. "Papa, you have not slept." "Perhaps not very much. One does not on the morning a daughter goes. I shall write each Tuesday. I have promised Mamma." "My dear," he said, "you do not need to send 3. I shall not pine." "You shall pine a little, Papa. So shall I. We shall pine carefully by post, and we shall manage." He smiled at that, very small. He held out the small thing he had carried up the stairs. "I should like you to take this with you." It was a small, worn, calf-bound book. The leather had gone soft from many readings, and the gilt of the title had almost worn away. "Papa, I cannot take your cowper. It was Mamma's." "It was. It is now yours. She read it to you when you were very small. She once told me that you fell asleep against her shoulder while she read The Task, and she did not have the heart to put you down. She held you for an hour. She said it was the kindest hour of her year. She told you that? I have kept it. I should like you to keep it instead." She took the book. The book was warm from his hands. She held it against the soft muslin at her breast, and she did not speak, and her father did not speak, and after a little while he kissed her very gently upon the forehead, and went out. She sat down upon the edge of the narrow bed, and opened it. Her mother had marked, with a green silk ribbon, a passage in The Task about a winter fireside, and beside it, in soft pencil, a small line in the margin and the letter L. She did not know what the L stood for. She only knew her mother had loved this passage, and had been in her grave 4 years now. She closed the book very gently and laid it on the top of the muslin in the trunk. Then she put on her stockings and her plain cream silk gloves and her small ivory cameo upon its fine pearl ribbon at her throat, and she lifted the soft cream muslin day dress over her head, and she stepped quite carefully into the rest of her life. The carriage that came for her was a small black traveling carriage with 2 patient bay horses. The trunk was lifted up behind. Her father stood at the gate in his cassock with her 3 sisters behind him. She climbed into the corner of the carriage and lifted one gloved hand against the small window in farewell, and her father lifted his hand in answer, and she did not let herself cry until the lane had rounded and the vicarage was out of sight. She had been told in the careful long letter that had come 3 weeks before that Ashbrook Hall was a moderate country house in the Hampshire Downs, that its master was the Duke of Ashbrook, 33 years old, a widower of 5 years, and that the post was for governess to a single child, the Duke's young niece, the Lady Ophelia, 8 years old. The letter had said only that Lady Ophelia was a quiet child, a careful child, a child who had known a great deal of loss, and that what was wanted at Ashbrook was patience. The carriage came in through a long avenue of limes, and through the bare upper branches she saw, for the first time, the honeystone front of the house. It was not a grand house. It was a moderate country house, square and steady and kind, with tall arched windows and a small flight of stone steps. As the carriage drew up, she saw a soft, full figure of a woman in a charcoal gray day dress and a starched white apron come quietly out. "Miss," said the housekeeper, "I am Mrs. Pym. Welcome to Ashbrook." "Thank you, Mrs. Pym." "His Grace is in the library, miss. Tea will be brought. The child is in the morning room." "How is the child today?" "Well in body, miss." "And in spirit?" "That, miss, is what we have engaged you for." "What is her name?" "Lady Ophelia. She was named for kindness, miss." "Then she shall have kindness," said the heroine. "Yes, miss," said Mrs. Pym very softly. "Yes, I believe she shall." She was taken into the morning room. It was at the south side of the house, with a tall, arched window streaming soft afternoon light, a polished walnut sideboard with a small porcelain shepherdess, delicate cream wallpaper with small painted summer roses, and a Persian rug under a small round mahogany tea table set for two. At the table, on a low chair, in a pale blue Regency child's frock with white lace at the collar, sat a small grave girl of 8 years old with strawberry blonde hair tied in 2 ribbons. The child had a small calf-bound leather journal in her lap. She was not writing in it. She was only holding it as though it were a thing one held. "Lady Ophelia," said Mrs. Pym, "this is your new governess." The child looked up. The child's eyes were grave hazel and very large. She laid the small leather journal aside, and she stood, and she made a small, careful curtsy of exactly the kind she had been taught. "Good afternoon." "Good afternoon," said the heroine, and she sank down very gently on the low chair opposite, so that her gray-blue eyes were level with the child's grave hazel ones. Mrs. Pym went out and closed the door. The kettle was on the spirit stand. The 2 small porcelain cups stood on saucers. There was a small plate of soft summer biscuits, and a single sprig of climbing roses laid in a small silver dish. The heroine had brought in her reticule a careful little script. It began in a polite, formal voice. "Lady Ophelia, I am very pleased to make your acquaintance, and I look forward to our lessons together. May I ask first what you have lately been studying in your French?" She did not use the script. She set it aside in her own mind, very gently, the way one might set aside a kind but unsuitable gift. Then she folded her gloved hands around the small porcelain teacup, and she said, in the soft, easy voice in which she had used to ask things of her younger sisters, "Lady Ophelia, what is your favorite hour of the day?" The child blinked. She had not been asked that. She had been asked, perhaps, what she had been studying, and whether she preferred French or Italian, and whether she had a pony. She had not, in 5 years, been asked what hour of the day she liked best. "My favorite hour, miss?" "Yes, dear, whichever hour you like best of the whole long day. There is no wrong hour." "Even an hour at night?" "Even an hour at night." "Even an hour before breakfast?" "Even an hour before breakfast, dear, although I should warn you that any hour before breakfast does not, in my experience, like to be told it is anyone's favorite." The child considered. At last she said, in a small, grave, careful voice, "The hour after sunset, when the candles are lit, but the sky is still pale." The heroine smiled. She did not smile widely. She only smiled in the small, soft way she had smiled at her younger sisters when they said brave, true things. "That is a very particular hour, and a very kind one. I am glad you have it." "Have you a favorite hour, miss?" "I think mine is the small hour after a thrush begins, but before the rest of the birds. It is perhaps 10 minutes long. It is the hour when one is allowed to believe that the day will be kind. It is the kind of hour one might write down." "It is." The child looked at her. The child kept looking at her, in fact, for a long moment. "It is the hour I write my sentence." "Your sentence?" "Every evening I write one sentence in this book. I have written one every evening since I was 3 years old. The sentence is whatever the day was. I am keeping them." "That is a very fine thing to keep." "My uncle does not know. He does not know I keep them. He does not know I have a book at all." "I see." "It is not a secret, miss. It is only a thing I do." "Then we shall not call it a secret. We shall call it a thing you do." They sat in a small, kind silence, and they drank their tea, and the heroine ate one of the soft summer biscuits, and the child ate half of one and laid the other half carefully back upon the plate. Somewhere through the wall, a clock struck 4. That single sentence the child had given her, "The hour I write my sentence," was the sentence she would spend the rest of her days at Ashbrook trying to understand. It was while they were finishing the tea that the door of the morning room opened and the Duke of Ashbrook came in. He was a tall, lean, upright man of 33, with neatly trimmed dark brown hair brushed back from a high forehead, and a sharp, aquiline nose, and gray-blue eyes that carried, even in the soft afternoon light, a quiet, old grief. He was in a fitted dark charcoal Regency tailcoat over a cream silk waistcoat, a white silk cravat tied neatly, fawn breeches, and polished black knee-high riding boots. He bowed, very correctly, from the doorway. "Forgive me. I did not mean to interrupt the tea. I came only to make you welcome to Ashbrook." The heroine rose and made him a small, careful curtsy. "Your Grace, the welcome was already very kindly given." He inclined his head. His gray-blue eyes moved then to the small grave child, and a small, soft thing happened in his face. A thing the heroine would remember afterwards, because it was not exactly a smile, and it was not exactly grief. It was the careful, difficult look of a man who has been trying for 5 years to know how to speak to a child, and who has not, yet, quite found the way. "Ophelia," he said. His voice was very low. "I trust you have been kind to your new governess." The child stood. She made a small, careful curtsy. "Yes, uncle." That was all. The Duke did not approach the table. He did not lay a hand on the child's shoulder. He only bowed again and said to the heroine, "Mrs. Pym will show you your room. We dine at 6. He went out, the door closed. The child sat down again, very carefully, and lifted her teacup, and the heroine sat down again, and neither of them spoke for some minutes. "His Grace is not joining us, Mrs. Pym?" the heroine said when Mrs. Pym came back. "He has gone out, miss. The Clifftop Walk. He goes there sometimes. In hard hours, miss." "Mrs. Pym, was this a hard hour?" "It was, miss, because the child spoke to you. He has not heard her speak so to anyone in 5 years. He has tried. He has not yet found the way." "And so he goes to the Cliff Walk." "He goes to the Cliff Walk, miss." Later, alone in the morning room gathering up her gloves, she happened to look out of the tall, arched window, and she saw, on the high cliff walk that ran along the formal rose garden, the figure of the Duke walking alone. He had his hands clasped behind his back. He was looking out over the soft green Hampshire hills toward something only he could see. He did not look like a man taking a constitutional. He looked like a man who had come out of a room because he did not know how to stay in it. She watched him for a long moment. She did not know it then, but she was looking at the first turning point of his story. His retreat from the room when his ward had spoken more easily to a stranger in one afternoon than she had spoken to him in 5 years. The Duke of Ashbrook was a man who carried something he had not yet set down. The first 6 days at Ashbrook went by with the gentle, steady regularity of a good country clock. French in the morning, a little arithmetic, and in the long, quiet afternoons, reading aloud from a book of old English fairy tales. "Miss," said the child on the 3rd afternoon, "in this story, the woodcutter gives the small hare half of his bread. Why? Because it is morning, and the hare is hungry, and the woodcutter has more bread than he needs. Will the hare come back? Tomorrow. The hare always comes back, in stories of this kind, because the woodcutter was kind once. A kindness, dear, is rarely one kindness. It is most often two, the small kindness, and the coming back. Then I shall come back tomorrow." "Where, dear?" "Here, to the reading. I shall be the hare." "You shall be a very fine hare, Ophelia." "Will you be the woodcutter?" "I shall be the woodcutter." At every supper, in the long oak-paneled dining room, with the Duke at one end of the table and the child at the other, and the heroine between, the same thing happened. The first course would be eaten, mostly in silence, and then, just before the second course, the child would lay down her fork and look up the long table at her uncle and ask, in her small, grave, careful voice, "Was today a good day, uncle?" "It was a quiet day, Ophelia. The weather was kind." "Thank you, uncle." On the next evening, "Was today a good day, uncle?" "It was a good day. The new lambs are doing well." "Thank you, uncle." It was on the 4th evening, eating soup in the candlelight, that the heroine understood what was happening. The child was not making conversation. The child was gathering her sentence. Whatever the Duke said, the child was choosing from those words the words she would write down that night in the small, calf-bound leather journal. The child had been doing this for 5 years. The Duke did not know. It was on the 7th day, in the afternoon, that Lady Ophelia leaned across the small, round mahogany tea-table in the morning room and whispered her secret. The morning room was as it had been on the first day. Mrs. Pym, who had brought the tea, had gone quietly out and closed the door. The child had drunk half of her tea. They had eaten one biscuit between them. Then the child set her cup down upon its saucer, very carefully, and looked across the small mahogany table at the heroine, and her grave hazel eyes were not the eyes of an 8-year-old just then. They were the eyes of an 8-year-old who has been carrying a thing by herself for 5 long years. "Miss," she said very quietly. "Yes, Ophelia." The child glanced once at the closed door. Then she leaned a small way forward, and she said in a soft, small whisper that was meant only for the heroine's ear, "I know a thing about my Aunt Frances. The Duke does not. I have not told him. I do not know how." The heroine set her own cup down. She did not move quickly. "Tell me, dear, if you wish." The child drew a small, slow breath. "The night before my Aunt Frances was to have her baby, she wrote a letter. I was 3 years old, Mrs. Pym told me. Mrs. Pym was there. My Aunt Frances wrote a letter for the baby that was coming in case. She wrote it on the writing desk by her bed. She tucked it into the back of a book of Cowper's poems on her bedside table, the calf-bound one she liked best. And she told only Mrs. Pym, and Mrs. Pym told only me. The letter was for the baby on the baby's wedding day. It said, on the outside, 'To my child, on your wedding day, from your mother.' And then the baby did not come, and my Aunt Frances did not come. And the book, Mrs. Pym does not know which Cowper. because the library was put in a new order 3 years ago. The book is somewhere in the library still, and nobody has ever read the letter. It is still there. I have known it for 5 years. I was 3. I remembered every word. The whisper ended. The child sat back in her low chair, her small face perfectly composed, in the way grave children are composed after great efforts. She lifted her teacup again and drank very steadily, as though she had not just laid down the largest thing she had ever held. The heroine did not speak for a long moment. The cup in her own gloved hand was still warm. Outside in the rose garden, a small wood pigeon called and was answered. Her tea had not yet cooled. "Ophelia, thank you for telling me. You will not laugh at me. It is not a thing for laughing. I shall not laugh. You believe me?" "Yes, dear, I do. May I ask 3 small questions about it?" 3. You were 3? I was 3. Mrs. Pym was rolling pastry. I was sitting on the kitchen step. She told me very softly. She said, "Your aunt has left a small folded letter for you, my poppet, in the back of a calf-bound cowper. And you are to remember it, and one day you are to find it." The book, your aunt's bedside cowper, was it small or large? Small. It fit in her 2 hands like a prayer book. Brown leather, worn gilt at the spine. You have known this for 5 years. You have not told me until today. What changed? The child considered. She looked across the small mahogany tea table at the heroine for a long, careful country moment. "You asked me, miss, what hour was my favorite. No one had asked me. I had decided after that I would tell you a thing, when I had a thing to tell. I have been waiting since." "Ophelia, that is the kindest reason for waiting I have ever heard. Eat your biscuit, the whole biscuit. You have done a great brave thing today, and you will need the biscuit." The child picked up the half biscuit she had set down on the first day, and the second day, and every day since, and at last, very gravely, she ate it. CTA, Soft Drowsy Register, mid-video. If this story is keeping you company tonight, take a moment to press the like button below. It helps these candlelit stories find their readers. That evening at supper, the child looked up the long table. "Was today a good day, Uncle?" "It was a kind day, Ophelia. The roses are coming on. There is a yellow one along the south wall I had not noticed. Have you, Uncle? It is, perhaps, time I noticed yellow roses?" "Thank you, Uncle." The Duke lifted his glass briefly to his ward. The child lifted hers. The heroine, between, did not speak. She had been given the small, careful keeping of a 5-year-old secret. She did not yet know what she would do with it. "Miss," said the Duke, when the second course had been laid. He had not, on previous suppers, addressed her at all. "Your Grace?" "Lady Ophelia tells me you read fairy tales together." "We do, Your Grace." "There is a kind woodcutter in our book, Uncle," said the child, "and a hare. The hare comes back. Because the woodcutter was kind once. A kindness is rarely one kindness. It is most often 2. The small kindness and the coming back. Miss told me. Miss told you that." "Yes, Uncle." The Duke looked very steadily across the long oak table at the heroine. The candles burned gently down their wicks. After a while, he lifted his glass once more in the heroine's direction, very small, and the heroine lifted hers, and the supper went quietly on. On the morning of the second day after the secret, Mrs. Pym came to her in the morning room very softly before breakfast. "You have been quiet these 2 days, miss. I am thinking very carefully about the child. Has she said something to you, miss?" "She has. I shall not repeat it. I do not think it is mine to repeat." "That is the right answer, miss." "Mrs. Pym, was there a letter? Long ago, in this house, the night before the late Duchess's labor. A small folded letter, addressed to a child on a child's wedding day. Mrs. Pym went very still. Mrs. Pym, who had served at Ashbrook for 38 years, set down the small silver tray very carefully upon the small mahogany tea table. There was, miss. I told only the child. She was 3. She came to me in the kitchen and asked, in her small grave way, where her aunt was. I had not the heart to give her only an answer. I told her her aunt had left her that night, a small folded letter, and that the letter would be hers when she was old enough. I thought she would forget. She did not forget. No, miss. She has been carrying it 5 years. I have been carrying knowing she carries it, and I have not had the courage to lift it from her. I am too old, miss. You are not too old, Mrs. Pym. I am too tired, miss, which is the same thing in the end. You are not. You will, I think, lift it. I shall try. Do you know which Cowper? No, miss. The library was put in a new order 3 years ago by the Duke himself. There are, I think, 8. Then we shall look at all 8. It was that afternoon, in the rose garden after luncheon, that the child slipped her small hand into the heroine's gloved one without a word. The heroine had never been given the child's hand before. She was given it that afternoon, and never afterwards refused. The next morning, she put on her soft cream muslin day dress and her plain cream silk gloves and her small ivory cameo. She pinned up her honey blonde hair with the small sprig of white roses. Then she went, alone, to the library. The library at Ashbrook was a long, oak-paneled room with 2 tall, arched windows facing south and a third facing east, and 3 walls of shelves, and a small, dark Persian rug in the middle, and a writing desk in one corner with a single old quill, and a polished walnut broadwood pianoforte standing closed in the far corner, with its lid down, and a small embroidered cover laid over the lid as though no one wished to see the keys. She began on the lowest shelf nearest the east window. She drew down the first book. Bishop Berkeley. She put it back. She drew down the second. A Latin Cicero. She put it back. She drew down the third. Cowper. Her heart lifted. She opened the volume to the back. There was nothing there. She closed it and put it back. She had not been at it 20 minutes when there was a soft step at the door. The child was standing in the doorway in her pale blue frock, with her small calf-bound journal clasped in front of her. Miss, said the child. Come in, dear. The child came in. She closed the door softly behind her. You are looking. I am looking. May I look with you? Dear, said the heroine, and she sank down on the soft Persian rug very gently, so that her gray-blue eyes were level with the child's. I should not be looking at all if you had not asked me to. Sit down beside me. We shall look together. And so they did. They sat together upon the soft Persian rug, and the heroine drew down each volume of Cowper as she came to it, and laid it open across her lap, and lifted the back cover, and ran one gloved fingertip along the inside. And the child watched, and breathed. And after the 3rd volume, the child began to draw down the volumes herself. It was slow work. Cowper was much loved at Ashbrook, and there were a great many copies, small calf-bound editions, larger gilt-edged editions, a single tall green morocco-bound presentation copy on a high shelf. They worked through the morning. They worked through the next afternoon. They worked through the morning after that. Miss, said the child on the 2nd morning, what if we do not find it? Then we shall have looked. Looking is a kind thing, Ophelia. It is often half of what one can do. My uncle does not know we are looking. No, dear. Should we tell him? Not yet. He came to the door yesterday. He saw us on the rug. He said, Pray, do not let me disturb you. And he went away. What if the something never comes? Then we shall, in the end, tell him anyway. We shall tell him we tried. That is also a thing one can give a person. The trying, even when the trying did not find. On the second afternoon, the Duke came in. He stopped in the doorway. He saw, quite simply, his governess and his ward seated together upon the Persian rug, among a careful little drift of opened Cowper volumes. And he saw, also, that something quiet and serious was going forward between them. He only inclined his head and said, "Pray do not let me disturb you," and went away. The heroine had begun, by now, to see a thing in him she had not seen on the first afternoon at the morning-room window. She had begun to see that the Duke of Ashbrook did not retreat from his ward out of coldness. He retreated out of love. He retreated because he did not yet know how to come close, and because he would not risk hurting the child by trying badly. It was on the Tuesday afternoon of the second week in May, a soft Hampshire afternoon, with the bees beginning in earnest in the rose garden, that they found the letter. The volume was a small calf-bound edition of Cowper's poems, bound in soft brown leather worn very smooth at the corners, shelved 3 shelves above the Persian rug. The child drew it down with both her small hands. She laid it across her own pale blue lap. She opened the back cover, and there, between the marbled end paper and the backboard, where it had lain for 5.5 years, was a small folded sheet of fine cream paper, sealed with a small dab of red wax, addressed in a careful upright woman's hand. "To my child, on your wedding day, from your mother." The child went very still. The heroine did not move. "It is here?" "Yes, dear, it is here. It is the right one. The leather is brown, the gilt is worn. It would fit just so in 2 hands. 5 years. 5 years, and it has been waiting. Miss, I cannot lift it. Then I shall lift it for you, dear. Set the book down upon the rug. There. Now I shall slide it out very carefully." The heroine held the small folded sheet between her gloved fingers. She did not open it. She would not, for the world, have opened it. "Will you take it to him, miss?" "Yes, dear, if you wish." "I wish you will hold my hand." "Yes." She held the letter against her own breast, the way a person holds a small living thing that has been waiting to be carried home, and she rose from the Persian rug, and she gave the child her free hand, and the 2 of them, hand in hand, went out of the library to find the Duke. He was in the small estate office at the back of the house, going over rents with his steward. He looked up at the soft tap upon the door. He saw, in his doorway, his governess in her soft cream muslin day dress, and his ward in her pale blue frock with her small hands clasped before her, and the steward took one quiet look at them and rose. "Your Grace, if I may, I shall come back at 4. He went. The door closed. "Your Grace," said the heroine. Her voice was very steady. "Lady Ophelia and I have found a thing in the library that belongs, we believe, to you." The Duke laid down his pen. He looked first at his ward's small grave face. Then he looked at the heroine. Then he looked at the small folded letter she held out to him. He took it. He turned it over. He saw the careful, upright woman's hand on the front. He saw the words, "To my child, on your wedding day, from your mother." He saw the small red seal, unbroken. He sat for a long moment without speaking. The heroine watched the way the soft afternoon light moved across his pale face, and the way his gray-blue eyes slowly filled and did not fall. "Where?" he said at last. His voice had gone very low. "In the back of a small calf-bound Cowper, your Grace, on the 3rd shelf above the Persian rug. The Duchess put it there the night before her labor. She told only Mrs. Pym. Mrs. Pym told only Lady Ophelia. Lady Ophelia was 3 years old, She has remembered for 5 years. We have been looking, she and I, since Friday." The Duke looked then at his ward. He came round the corner of the small oak desk. He went down upon one knee on the bare boards of the small estate office in his polished black riding boots and his fitted dark charcoal tailcoat, so that his gray-blue eyes were level with the child's. He did not, even now, touch her. He had not yet learned to touch her. "You have carried this for 5 years." "Yes, uncle." "By yourself?" "Yes, uncle." "And you did not tell me." "I did not know how, uncle. I am sorry." "No, dear, do not be sorry. You were 3 years old when Mrs. Pym told you. You did, at 3, what almost no child of 3 does. You kept a thing kindly, in case it was wanted. That is, in fact, almost the kindest thing I have ever heard." "I was afraid you would be sad." "I am sad, Ophelia. I am also very glad. The sadness and the gladness are sitting together just now. They are not fighting. They are, perhaps, having tea." The smallest, faintest, most careful crack of something, almost like a smile, moved at the corner of the child's mouth, and then steadied itself, and was gone. The Duke saw it. The heroine saw it. None of them spoke of it. The Duke rose. He looked at the heroine over the small grave head of his ward. "Will you both come with me to the library?" "Yes, your grace." So they went, the 3 of them, back through the long stone passage to the long oak-paneled library, where the soft afternoon light still came in across the polished floor in long honey-colored stripes, and where the careful little drift of opened Cowper volumes still lay upon the Persian rug. The Duke went to the rug. He sat down upon it, the way a man sits down upon a hearth in his own house when he can no longer stand. He laid the small folded letter upon his knee. "Will you sit with us?" "Yes, your grace," said the heroine, and she sat down upon the rug beside him very quietly. Her cream muslin spread about her in a soft circle, and the child sat down on his other side. He broke the small red seal. He unfolded the letter. He read it aloud. It was not a long letter. It was a careful letter, written in a careful, upright woman's hand, written by a young woman of 28 on a quiet evening in February of 1810. The letter began, "My dear child," it said the writer did not know whether she would be there to read this with her child, and that she hoped very much that she would. It said the child's father was the kindest man the writer had ever known, that he played the pianoforte very ill but very dearly, that he had courted her very slowly over 2 long, quiet years, and that the courting had been the great, gentle joy of her life. It said the writer was not afraid. It said she was very tired and very full of love, and that those were good ways to be on a quiet evening in February. It ended, "Whatever child reads this, my own or any other dear child come to read it instead, be very gentle with yourself, and be very gentle with the one beside you, and remember that you were loved before you were even quite known by your mother." The Duke read the whole letter aloud, very carefully, very steadily. When he reached the closing line, his voice did not break. It was only when he had finished, and folded the letter again, and laid it upon his knee, that he put his face quietly into his hands. He did not weep loudly. He was not a loud man. He wept the way a tall, lean, upright man weeps when he has been carrying a thing for 5 years and has at last set it down. A small, slow giving way of the shoulders, a soft, soundless shaking, a turning of the face into the hands, as though the hands were a private room he had only just remembered he was allowed to enter. The child looked at him, the child who had not yet, in 5 years, touched her uncle of her own accord, set down her small calf-bound journal upon the rug. She slid one small, white-slippered foot a small way nearer along the rug. She laid her own small hand, very lightly, upon the polished black knee of his nearer riding boot. The Duke, without lifting his face from his hands, laid his own free hand down over hers. The heroine sat very still. She did not move. She did not speak. She only watched, with her gloved hands folded in the soft cream muslin of her lap, while the long, honey-colored afternoon light moved very slowly across the careful little drift of opened Cowper volumes upon the Persian rug. It was some long while before any of them spoke. The Duke at last drew his hands from his face. "Miss, I do not know how to thank you." "You do not need to thank me, Your Grace." "I do." "Then you have. We shall leave it there." He looked at her. The long, honey-colored afternoon light moved across his pale face, his sharp aquiline nose, his careful gray-blue eyes. "Will you read it again sometime?" "Whenever you wish, Your Grace." "Ophelia, should you like to sit with me at supper this evening, on the same side of the table?" The child considered. The grave little face was very steady. "Yes, uncle, I should like that." The weeks that followed were quiet weeks. They contained no balls and no scandals. They contained, instead, small, ordinary kindnesses, undertaken slowly by three people who had at last begun to know each other. The Duke began to sit with the child after supper. He did not at first speak a great deal. He sat in the small armchair across from her in the morning room while she read aloud, very gravely, the children's book the heroine had begun with her, and he listened, and at the end of each chapter he said very gently, "Thank you, Ophelia." "What was the kindest line, uncle?" "The line about the bread." "The bread again, uncle?" "The bread, always." The Duke walked, on Tuesday afternoons, with the heroine and the child in the formal rose garden. He had asked, on the Friday after the letter, whether the heroine would do him the kindness of accompanying his ward and himself, and the heroine had said, very simply, that she would be very glad to. Each Tuesday, the child named the roses, gravely, 11 of them, and the Duke, who had not known a single rose by name on the first Tuesday, learned very slowly by the third Tuesday to name 4. It was on the third Tuesday, a soft, warm afternoon in early June, with the rose walk in full bloom, that they came at last to the small stone seat at the end of the rose walk, and the child, who had been walking ahead, sank down upon it with the small calf-bound journal in her lap, and began, very gravely, to write. The Duke and the heroine stood behind her at a small, careful distance. They did not speak. After some moments he said, in a very low voice, almost as much to himself as to her, "She has not spoken to me as easily as she speaks to you." "She speaks to you, Your Grace. She speaks to you every supper. She has been speaking to you for 5 years. You did not perhaps know she was speaking, but she was." The Duke looked at her then, in the soft afternoon light, for a long moment. "You are a kind young woman." "I am only a country vicar's middle daughter, Your Grace." "Miss Cowper." "Your Grace?" "There is a passage, in The Task, Book 4, the winter evening one, about the small, steady joy of a kind fireside. She liked it. My Frances." She marked it once, in pencil, in the small calf-bound copy on her bedside table. "I have not opened that book in 5 years. I should, I think, like to read it again. I wonder whether, on a quiet evening, when Ophelia has gone to bed, you would consent to read it with me, in the library, the two of us, very gently. Only Cowper, only the one passage, aloud." The heroine looked up at him. She did not speak immediately. She knew, in the small, steady way that country vicars' daughters know such things, that what had just been asked of her was not a small thing. It was an offer of a shared book. It was, in its own quiet country way, the second turning point of her own story. The agreement to be near him, the Cowper Rose Walk shared library reading. Yes, Your Grace, I should be very glad to read it with you. Thank you, he said. The bees went on in the lavender. The child finished her sentence and laid down her small, careful pen and looked up and saw them standing together a little way off, and she did not say a word. She only, with the smallest possible movement of her grave mouth, almost smiled. They read the passage that evening. The library was very quiet. The two tall, arched south windows held the soft, late dusk. A single tall taper had been lit upon the writing desk by Mrs. Pym. The Duke sat in the small armchair by the writing desk. The heroine sat across from him, with the small calf-bound Cowper open across her knees. She read the passage. She read it slowly. She read it kindly. She read it without looking up at him, because she understood that he did not need to be looked at just then, only listened to alongside. When she had finished, she closed the book very gently. She used to read it to me on winter evenings. Frances. She used to laugh at the part about the cat. Shall I read it again? Not tonight, miss. I should like to keep it. You did not laugh at the cat. I should not laugh, Your Grace, when the laugh belongs to someone else. That was kindly done. It was easily done. I have, in our parish, sat with 3 widowers. One learns after a while what to do with a laugh that is not yet one's own. One sets it aside, very gently, on the chair beside one. One waits. Miss, you are very young to know such things. I am 23, Your Grace. I am older than my mother was when she was widowed for the first time. She married a second time, in the end. My father was her second husband. She kept her first husband's small gold ring her whole life, in a small wooden box on her dressing table, beside my father's silver. She told me once that grief did not take from love, that the keeping of one did not unmake the other. Did she say that? She did. I was 15. I did not know what to do with it. I have known since. He looked at her then, across the small, careful candle-lit space. His gray-blue eyes did not carry, just at that moment, only the quiet old grief. They carried, alongside the grief, something else. It was the small, first soft dawning of a new gentle thing. He did not name it. Miss, you will read with me again. Whenever you wish, Your Grace. Tomorrow and the next day. And the next day. Miss, one more thing. You have not asked about the pianoforte. No, Your Grace, I have not. I shall not. Why? Because, Your Grace, it is yours. The lid is yours to lift in your own time. I have, in our parish, learned that one does not ask widowers about their pianos. Miss. Good night, Your Grace. She rose. She left the small calf-bound Cowper upon the writing desk by the candle. She went out very softly. She climbed the back stairs to her own small room above the library in her stocking feet, because she did not wish to wake the child, and she undressed slowly and got into the narrow bed under the eaves with her mother's old, worn, calf-bound Cowper open beside her on the coverlet, although she did not that night read it. She lay quite still and listened to the soft Hampshire night outside. It was perhaps half an hour later that she heard the first soft note. She thought at first that she had imagined it, but the note came again and was followed by another, and then by the careful small phrase of a tune, and she sat up quietly in the narrow bed, and she understood, with a small, soft, inward shock, what she was hearing. The Duke of Ashbrook, who had not played the pianoforte in 5 years, had sat down at the polished walnut broadwood pianoforte in the long oak-paneled library directly beneath her room, alone, by the light of the single tall taper, after she had gone, and he was playing, very slowly, very carefully, with the small, uncertain pauses of a man whose hands had forgotten and had begun to remember. It was a soft, small tune. It was, she would learn afterwards, the tune that had been the late Duchess Frances's favorite. It was the second turning point of his own story. The Duke at the Broadwood pianoforte alone, after dark, for the first time in 5 years. She did not interrupt him. She lay very still in the narrow bed under the eaves, and she listened, with her hands folded over her own breast, while the soft, small tune unfolded itself, careful note by careful note, in the dark country house below her. And after a long time, the soft, small tune ended, and the lid of the pianoforte was very quietly closed, and the tall taper was very quietly snuffed. The summer at Ashbrook went slowly on. The roses came on. The child, by the smallest careful degrees, began to be a child again. To laugh, on one specific Tuesday in late June, at a wood pigeon that had landed clumsily in the lavender border. A single, small, soft, surprised laugh that the heroine and the Duke both heard, and that they did not, by any agreement, comment upon, although they each, privately, kept it. "Did you hear it, miss?" Mrs. Pym said in the kitchen passage an hour later. "I did, Mrs. Pym. His Grace heard it. He stopped, miss, on the gravel. He stopped quite still. I have not heard her laugh since she was 3. 5 years and 1 Tuesday. Mrs. Pym, you may a little." "I shall a little. I shall sit down on the kitchen chair, and I shall a little. Do not look at me, miss." "I shall not look, Mrs. Pym." The child began to write longer sentences in the small, calf-bound journal. The child began, even on certain Tuesdays, to read aloud to her uncle in the library after supper. The Duke played the pianoforte again, very seldom, and only by single candlelight, late at night. The heroine heard him through the floor of her room above the library 2 or 3 times a week. She did not speak of it to him. He did not speak of it to her. It was their first shared private thing, and they each, separately, kept it. It was Mrs. Pym who broke the silence around it, and only with the heroine, on a Friday morning, in the linen press. "5 years, miss? 5 years that lid was down. I had laid the cover on it myself, in the February of 2010, the day after the funeral. I went into the library on Wednesday morning, and the cover, miss..." The cover had been folded, very carefully, and laid upon the bench. "I sat down on the rug, miss. I am 62 years old, and I sat down on the rug." Mrs. Pym: "It is your doing, miss. Not the playing, that is his, but the door of the playing, that is yours. He had the music in him these 5 years. He did not have, until you, anyone in the house above the library that he would willingly have played beneath. It was at the end of June that the letter came from London. It was on heavy cream paper, sealed with gray wax, addressed in a careful, unfamiliar hand. She read it in the morning room after breakfast, alone. It was an offer. A great London family, the Earl of W. and his Countess, having heard of her excellent character, had written to ask whether she would consent to come to them in town for the autumn. The salary offered was nearly twice what she received at Ashbrook. The letter was, in every line, a kind one. She held the letter for a long moment in her gloved hands. She thought of what it would mean. London. 2 young ladies of 9 and 11, no doubt clever and lively. A salary that would let her send a little home to her father at the vicarage. A step up. She thought also of a small grave child of 8 years old who had only just begun to laugh at a wood pigeon. She thought of a tall, lean, upright man of 33 who had only just begun by single candlelight to play again. She thought of a small, soft tune in the dark beneath her room. She thought of a small, folded letter on a Persian rug. She thought of a rose walk with a stone seat at its end. She thought of the 11 roses. She folded the letter again, very carefully, along its original folds, and she put it away in her reticule, and she did not, that day, answer. She did not answer for 2 more days. On the 3rd morning, after breakfast, she took the folded London letter from her reticule, and she went, alone, to the library. The Duke was at the small writing desk by the east window, going over a small estate paper with a steady pen. He looked up at the soft sound of her step. He saw at once, in her face, that something steady was coming, and he laid down the pen, and he rose. Miss. She came to the writing desk. She did not curtsy. She had passed, this summer, the small private point at which she had stopped curtsying to him in private rooms. Your Grace, I have had a letter from a great London family, the Earl and Countess of W. They wish me to come to them in the autumn. The salary is nearly twice what I have here. I see, he said. His voice had gone very low. I have not answered. She held the folded letter out to him. She held it with both gloved hands, very steady. She folded the London offer letter and handed it back to him unopened. Your Grace, I wish you to take it. I wish you to take it, please, unopened. I have given it the courtesy of 3 days' careful thought, and I have written my answer in my own mind, and I should be obliged if you would keep the letter for me, and burn it, if you will, in your own grate, on a cold evening when there is a little fire. She laid the folded London letter into his hand. He took it. He did not, even then, open it. I am needed here, she said. The Duke stood very still. The folded London letter lay in his open palm. You have not opened my hand. No, Your Grace? You wish me to keep it closed. I wish you to keep it closed. And the letter unburned until a cold evening with a little fire. Yes, Your Grace, because on a warm evening one burns letters in haste to be done with them. On a cold evening one burns letters slowly because the fire is wanted. Miss, you are a country vicar's daughter to the bone. I am, Your Grace. I had hoped you would not mind. I do not mind. That was, in its own quiet country way, the 3rd turning point of her own story. She had set aside her formal interview script on the first afternoon. She had agreed, in the Rose Walk, to read one specific passage aloud beside him by candlelight, and now, on a soft summer morning, she had folded a flattering London letter and handed it to him unopened, and said aloud, in 3 plain country words, where she meant to be. The Duke held the folded letter very still in his hand for a long moment. Then he closed his hand around the letter, very carefully. I shall keep it. I shall, on a cold evening, with a little fire, do as you have asked. Thank you, Your Grace. Miss, I had not let myself ask, but I am very glad you are staying. I know, Your Grace. How long have you known? Since the Rose Walk, Your Grace, the 3rd Tuesday in June, since you asked me to read a single Cowper passage by candlelight. And you did not say. It was not yet mine to say, and it was not yet, I think, yours to say. Miss, you are a country woman to the bone. I am. I had hoped, miss, he said very low, that you had hoped. She curtsied then, after all, very small and very kind, and she went out of the library, and she closed the door softly behind her, and she stood for a long moment in the cool stone passage, with her gloved hands pressed together against the soft cream muslin of her bodice, and she breathed in, and out, and in, and out. The summer ripened. Autumn came in. Then winter in its own slow Hampshire way. The heroine read The Task aloud to the Duke and the child many evenings that winter. They had a particular page they would not read past, the page Frances had marked in pencil with the letter L. "You stopped at the L." "I did, because the L is hers. It is her marker in her hand. It does not belong to me to read past. We have, on the small writing desk, a second small calf-bound Cowper. Your father's copy, I think. I shall, on Friday, bring that down, and on Friday we shall read past. Miss, that is the kindest small accuracy I have known. It was easily done, Your Grace." "It was not easily done. You went and looked, in 2 volumes. Spring came in again. The first cuckoo was heard in the lower meadow on the 15th of April, and the child wrote that sentence in the small calf-bound journal that evening. The cuckoo came back today. "Miss, I have written one for you, on the 14th, the day before. I wrote, 'Miss is staying.' You had given the letter back unopened. I had asked Mrs. Pym. She told me. She said you had said 3 words. I have written them down. Ophelia, that is a very good day for a sentence, dear." It was decided by Mrs. Pym and the steward and the Duke together that there would be a summer fete on the lawn at Ashbrook, the first since the Duchess's death 5½ years before. "His Grace, miss," said Mrs. Pym on a soft April morning, "has asked the steward to bring out the trestle tables from the barn. The trestles have not been out of that barn in 5½ years." The fete was set for the 2nd Saturday in June. The morning of the fete came in slowly, the way kind mornings do in the Hampshire country. The trestle tables were laid out on the wide estate lawn under the great copper beech, and the village women brought their honey and their gooseberry preserves and their small baskets of strawberries, and the village men set up the small wooden platform for the country band, and the children of the tenantry ran in the long grass with small flags of pale blue and cream that the heroine had cut out herself. The heroine wore, for the fete, a soft cream Regency ball gown that Mrs. Pym had laid on her bed that morning. It had been the Duchess Frances's, very simply altered, with the Duke's quiet permission, asked of the heroine through Mrs. Pym 2 weeks earlier. The child had been asked very gently by her uncle in the morning room with the heroine present. "Yes, uncle, I should like it. My Aunt Frances would have liked it too." So the heroine wore the soft cream ball gown and the small ivory cameo on the fine pearl ribbon at her throat, and the small sprig of white roses pinned at the side of her honey blonde chignon, and her plain cream silk gloves to the elbow, and she came down the broad, shallow stairs of Ashbrook Hall just as the first guests were beginning to gather on the lawn. The Duke was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, in his fitted dark charcoal Regency tailcoat over the cream silk waistcoat, his gray-blue eyes very steady. The child stood beside him in a soft pale blue summer frock with new white silk slippers, and she held her small calf-bound journal in both her hands because she carried it everywhere. "Miss," said the Duke quietly as she came down, "you wear it kindly." "Thank you, Your Grace." "Will you walk with me before the gates open, once around the rose walk?" "Yes, Your Grace." They walked. The morning sun was in the rose walk. The bees were already in the lavender. "There has been something I have wished to say since June." "Yes, Your Grace." "I have not known until this morning how to begin. I find this morning that I do not need to begin. I find that you have already known for some weeks." "Your Grace? You will not let me say it now, will you?" "Not now, Your Grace. Not before the gates open. Say it after the dance, when the lawn is empty and the lamps are out and only Mrs. Pym is awake. Then you may say whatever you wish, and I shall be ready to hear it. But not before, not in front of all the tenantry. The dance must be first. The dance must be first. Yes, Your Grace. You have thought about this, miss? I have, Your Grace, more or less every Tuesday since the Rose Walk. He almost smiled. He did not quite. He said, very low, then after the dance. The fete went on through the afternoon. The trestle tables were eaten from. The honey and the gooseberry preserves were praised. The small village band warmed up at the side of the lawn. A fiddle, a clarionet, a small pipe, a careful slow drum. Miss? Said the elderly Mrs. Hadley from the lower farm, holding up a small jar. My gooseberry, from last summer, for the kitchen at the hall. My grandmother's recipe, miss. The trick is the long slow. There is no quick gooseberry, miss, that is worth the eating. The same with most things. Mrs. Hadley, that is, I think, the wisest thing said today on the lawn. You are kind, miss. Will you sit beside His Grace at the dancing? Mrs. Hadley, that is for His Grace to decide. Mrs. Pym has told me. We have all been told. We are very pleased. The tenantry came up, family by family, in their best coats, and were greeted by the Duke at the head of the lawn. He greeted them by name. Today, he greeted them in addition, with a small, soft thing at the corner of his mouth that the older tenantry had not seen in 5.5 years. The heroine moved through the afternoon at the Duke's side and the child's side without ever quite being asked. It had simply, by the small, steady accumulation of a year, become the place she stood. She kept her gloved hand throughout, lightly upon the small shoulder of the pale blue child whenever the child was within reach, and the child, throughout, leaned a small way into her, almost without knowing. The sun began to slip. The lawn turned gold. The small village band struck up at last, very gently, the small, careful first dance, a slow country reel of the old kind, the kind used at Hampshire summer fetes since the time of the writer's grandfather. The villagers cleared a small open space upon the lawn by an old habit, and they looked, by the same old habit, toward the head of the lawn, where the master of the house stood, because the first dance was the master's. The Duke looked across the small open space of the lawn at the heroine. She was standing in the soft, cream ball gown of the late Duchess, very simply altered, with the small ivory cameo at her throat, and the small sprig of white roses at the side of her honey-blonde chignon, with the small calf-bound child in the pale blue frock leaning very lightly against her cream-gloved hand. The whole village was looking, the whole tenantry, the older tenants, who remembered the late Duchess, and the younger, who did not. Mrs. Pym by the trestle tables. He came across the lawn. He came slowly, the way he did all things. The whole village watched him come. He did not look away. He did not break. He came across the small open space of warm, soft summer grass, and he stopped before the heroine, and he bowed, very correctly, very steadily. Miss, will you do me the honor? Yes, Your Grace, she said. She gave him her gloved hand. At the village summer fete, the Duke took the heroine's hand for the first dance. Miss, are you afraid? No, Your Grace. Not of the dance, miss, of the watching. No, Your Grace, not of either. Then we shall not be afraid together. Then we shall not. He laid his other hand, very lightly, at the small of her back. The small village band began. The slow country reel began. They began to move, very simply, very carefully, on the warm summer grass before the entire tenantry of the estate, and the Duke of Ashbrook, who had not danced a first dance at a summer fete in 5.5 years, did not look away from her, and he did not break. The third turning point of his own story had simply come and been met, in front of every tenant on the estate, in the soft, slow gold of a Hampshire summer evening. The child sat down quietly in the grass at the edge of the small open space and opened her small calf-bound journal and lifted her small, careful pen and began, very gravely, to write the day's sentence, although it was only the late afternoon, because she had decided that the day's sentence had already arrived. "Miss," he said very low as they moved, "you said after the dance." "I did. It is during the dance. I have changed my mind. Say it now, very softly, so that only I shall hear it." "Will you stay at Ashbrook?" "I am staying at Ashbrook." "Will you stay at Ashbrook with me?" "Yes. Always. Yes. I have not the right to ask." "You have the right, Your Grace. I gave it you in the Rose Walk." "Did you?" "I did. I had not told you. I am telling you now." "Miss, thank you." "You are very welcome, Your Grace." The reel went on. The village band kept their slow, careful time. The child kept writing. The whole tenantry kept watching. And at the small, open dancing space in the center of the lawn, in the soft, slow gold of a Hampshire summer evening, a 23-year-old country vicar's middle daughter and a 33-year-old widowed Duke of Ashbrook did not look away from each other, and did not break, and danced, very gently, the slow, careful first dance of the country fete. CTA, soft, drowsy register, closing. If you have ever loved a quiet child or a quiet man, subscribe to Chapters by Candlelight. We tell these stories softly because some lives only unfold for those willing to sit with them in candlelight. And so, in the soft, slow gold of a Hampshire summer evening, before the entire tenantry of the estate, with the small village band playing, and the small grave child writing her sentence in the warm grass, and the late Duchess's gentle old gown moving very softly in the careful, careful country reel, a young woman of 23 and a tall, lean, upright man of 33 took, at last, their first slow, careful dance, and the small, dear cup of tea on the small, round mahogany tea table in the morning room 1 year before, where a grave 8-year-old child had once leaned across to whisper a secret about a calf-bound book of Cowper, was, by then, very long cooled.